In part 1, I explained that in order to understand the Ten Commandments, we need to understand how the Bible is written. And in order to understand any verses which appear to be out of place, we need to examine whether this happens in other places and whether there's a pattern. There can be no doubt that the Old Testament is written with unnecessary exaggerations and a persistent obsession with praising God for everything, whether it's good or bad, whether it's your harvest or the death of all your enemies, whether it's your journey to a distant land or your journey back again. And according to the Old Testament writers, God is responsible for virtually everything from infertility to the deaths of everyone in your family. So in part 2, I'm going to spend a bit of time examining whether these exaggerations actually exist or whether I'm just making it up. The verses I'm going to give are of no particular significance regarding their choice or selection, but they show how God is included in everything to the point of it not really making any sense anymore. Here's the first. "Don't call me Naomi," she told them. "Call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi? The Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me." Here is the next one. When the Lord was about to take Elijah up to heaven in a whirlwind, Elijah and Elisha were on their way from Gilgal. Elijah said to Elisha, "Stay here. The Lord has sent me to Bethel." But Elisha said, "As surely as the Lord lives and you live, I will not leave you." So they went down to Bethel. The company of the prophets at Bethel came out to Elisha and asked, "Do you know that the Lord is going to take your master from you today?" "Yes, I know," Elisha replied, "so be quiet." Then Elijah said to him, "Stay here, Elisha. The Lord has sent me to Jericho." And he replied, "As surely as the Lord lives, and as you live, I will not leave you." So they went to Jericho. The company of the prophets at Jericho went up to Elisha and asked him, "Do you know that the Lord is going to take your master from you today?" "Yes, I know," he replied, "so be quiet." Then Elijah said to him, "Stay here. The Lord has sent me to the Jordan." And he replied, "As surely as the Lord lives, and as you live, I will not leave you." And here's an incident from the story of David. The next day an evil spirit from God came forcefully on Saul. He was prophesying in his house while David was playing the harp, as he usually did. Saul had a spear in his hand, and he hurled it, saying to himself, "I'll pin David to the wall." But David eluded him twice. Saul was afraid of David, because the Lord was with David, but had departed from Saul. So he sent David away from him and gave him command over 1,000 men, and David led the troops in their campaigns. In everything he did, he had great success, because the Lord was with him. When Saul saw how successful he was afraid of him. But all Israel and Judah loved David because he led them in their campaigns. Saul said to David, "Here is my older daughter, Merab. I will give her to you in marriage. Only serve me bravely and fight the battles of the Lord." But the most obvious and persistent of all Old Testament exaggerations is making God responsible for everything. And when I say everything, I really do mean everything. In the next verses on the screen, we have blessings, cursings, infertility, the deaths of the firstborn in every family, the suggested murder of your own son, the deaths of everyone in your family, the murder of children, blindness, deafness, and muteness. According to the writers, God was the cause of all of them. There are so many that I'm not going to read them all out. I haven't got time to comment on these verses individually, but you will just have to take my word for it that this problem is not confined to just these examples. If you need further confirmation, then look at websites such as this one. A word of warning. I am not recommending this website, its content, or the book that goes with it. I'm just making you aware that I'm not the only one who has found very strange things in the pages of the Bible. I don't recommend the website because it exists exclusively to discredit and malign the Bible and makes no room for the rest of the book, which is not exaggerated, violent, inaccurate or contradictory. So, in support of the Bible, over 25% of it is prophecy, most of which has already come true and some of which can be seen today. There is nothing more accurate or non-contradictory than a prophecy which comes true 2,000 or even 3,000 years after it was written. As you will see later, the story that we are examining at the moment, the Ten Commandments, are in fact a prophecy of future events. But the conclusion from all of this has to be that the writers got many things wrong, that 75% of the Bible is very unreliable, and if we are to believe that God causes everything, such as infertility or blindness, we might as well include fairies, unicorns, alien abductions and Father Christmas in the Old Testament stories. Even if God is a delusion, or invented in the mind, which many people believe he was from the Stone Age onwards, we cannot have a capricious, murderous and evil God. Also remember how and when these events were written, hundreds of years after the event, and having been passed orally from one generation to another. This is the biblical version of the so-called Chinese whispers, and it is biblical in both senses of the word. In the history of journalism in the 21st century, or the writing of papyrus in 1000 BCE, this must be the most unreliable way to pass on the facts and figures of a story. It took approximately another 1,000 years before the New Testament writers started getting some things right for a change. Here are 3 examples.